Hello, Woodbridge. My name is Scott Prud'homme. I am a 13-year resident of Woodbridge. Moved here with my wife Joy and daughter Claire back in 2013. This past September, I was appointed a member of the Board of Finance and was reappointed back in January of this year. Prior to the Board of Finance, I served on the Economic Development Commission for 3 years here in town. In addition to the Board of Finance, I serve as the treasurer of A Common Ground for Woodbridge. And my colleagues at A Common Ground asked me to provide a little overview of our town budgeting process, generally to inform residents what they need to know, and in addition, provide my perspectives coming out of my first budget process, which will be this fiscal 27 budget that we will see. So Common Ground, we have three key pillars that we do focus on: smart growth, fair taxes, and open doors. So what follows is a 4-part series on our budgeting process designed to provide a fact-based, transparent overview on our budget and our budgeting process. And we're going to break this into 4 segments for you to try to make it as digestible as possible. First, we will talk about our budget background. How does it work? What is a mill rate? What is the grand list? How are your taxes calculated? What comprises the Woodbridge budget? Secondly, we'll have an episode on our past. How did we get here? We're going to take a look at the last 10 years of Woodbridge taxes and the choices that the town has made that have led us to where we are today. Third episode, we'll focus on our present and future. Present being our fiscal 27 budget. I just received my notice in the mail today. And future, fiscal 28 and beyond. What's coming and why, and what will it mean to you? And then a final segment on what we can do and provide an overview of A Common Ground's Fair Taxes Action Plan. So our hope here is that everyone is informed in advance of the April 28th preliminary budget meeting. And we look forward to, and hopefully you can check out all 4 episodes. All right, so part 1, our budget background. How does it work? Okay, so here is an overview of the budget background. In November and December, the Board of Finance submits requests to all the various departments across Woodbridge that comprise our budget. So town government, town services, the Woodbridge Board of Education, the Amity Board of Education. These comprise all the operating expenses for the town. That is submitted in November and December. And this past year, the Board of Finance, as they have in years past, requested each of the departments to come back with their budget request, and in addition, a budget that would get them to a 0% increase. In January and February, the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen meet in a joint meeting and hear the department presentations. So each and every department in town, including education, has their chance to present to the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance with their requested budget. In February, the Board of Selectmen takes all of those requests and develops a cut at the budget, and the Board of Selectmen votes on that budget to be forwarded on to the Board of Finance. In March, the Board of Finance, we review the Board of Selectmen's recommendation, determine where we think opportunities may exist. And then by the end of March, we had a final vote on the budget that we were going to present on April 28th at the preliminary budget hearing. And then finally, you will have a chance to vote on the budget that you see at the annual town meeting on May 18th. Currently, there is a referendum for the Amity Board of Education budget that all 3 towns vote on. Common Ground are advocates for a referendum for all of the entire Woodbridge budget, which does not currently exist. So taking a look at how your tax bill is calculated. So the first thing we want to get to is the amount to be funded by taxes. This is how much the town needs to collect in order to operate the town and service our debt. So The first area that we focus on are the operating expenses and debt service. So the operating expenses are really driven by that budgeting process, that all the different department requests and the vote that we just explained in the prior slide. So for an example, we're going to assume a town operating budget, operating expenses and debt service of about $35 million. Secondly, we take a look at non-tax revenues. So non-tax revenues include funding from the state of Connecticut, revenues from town services such as recreation, the transfer station, as well as investment income and other revenue sources. So this reduces the operating expenses that the town is required to operate. And then finally, the difference between those two numbers is the amount that needs to be funded by taxes. And this really drives your overall tax bill. So for this example, we assumed $35 million in operating expenses, $5 million in non-tax revenues, leaving you with $30 million to be funded by tax. Okay, so the next step in understanding how your tax bill is calculated is understanding the mill rate. The mill rate is essentially, it's a ratio. It is the tax rate that is applied to every $1,000 of assessed value of your home, your motor vehicle, everything that is comprised of the grand list. What is the grand list? In our example here, we're going to assume a grand list of about $1 billion. So the grand list is essentially the value of all real estate and personal property in Woodbridge. This includes the value of your home. It also includes the value of motor vehicles, any commercial real estate, commercial property, so businesses in town, the equipment and fixtures that they may have. All of this rolls up into the grand list. So for our example, we're going to assume $1 billion. Woodbridge's grand list is more like $1.6 billion, but this just makes the math a little easier. Secondly, we're going to look at that amount funded by taxes, which we just determined in the prior slide. So the $1 billion grand list is divided by the amount that we need to fund by taxes, or $30 million. This results in a mill rate for our example of 33.3. So essentially $33.3 for every $1,000 of assessed value of real estate, personal property, etc. So now you understand the mill rate. So now we're going to bring it home. In our example, how your tax bill is calculated, we're going to take that mill rate we just determined of 33.3. Let's assume the market value for a home is $100,000. So again, a very basic example. $100,000 home. It is then calculated by an assessment rate, which is standard across Connecticut, of 70%. So the $100,000 home, you would take $100 times 70%, or 70, and then multiply that by the mill rate of 33.3. So your resulting tax bill in this scenario is $2,331. So hopefully now it makes sense. Like, well, what is this grand list that they talk about? What is a mill rate? And how all this is in relation to the market value of your home, which is, comes out of the assessments, like the one that we just had a little while back. All right, so next we want to take a look at how the Woodbridge budget is distributed. So going back to those operating expenses and debt service that we talked about, what is the breakdown? What are we spending all the money on? When you take a look at Woodbridge's budget, it's actually pretty easy to understand. It's almost a third. 31% roughly of our overall operating expenses come from town expenses. This is the cost of running our town government, from all of our services, police, fire, recreation, library. And 2/3 of our overall budget really come from education. This is the big chunk. So about 31% from the Woodbridge Board of Education, or Beecher. About 33% goes to Amity Board of Education. And this is pretty common for many towns, in that they spend roughly 2/3 of their overall budget on education. And then the final piece is our CapEx, or capital expenditures, and debt service. So these are really the one-time projects that we either fund through one-time capital expenditures, say we need to put a roof on a building or a new HVAC unit. We may choose to just pay that in 1 year, or we may choose to take on debt, longer term debt service, something in the neighborhood of 10 to 20 years. So when you look at Woodbridge's budget, about 5% of our overall expenditures go to servicing either debt or paying one-time capital expenditures. So this is really the big picture and how all of this comes together. So knowing what we know about how our budget is comprised, we now are going to turn to how can we stabilize residential taxes. And we're really going to get into this a little more in the next couple of episodes. But first and foremost, growing our commercial tax base. Increasing the revenue that we receive from businesses, both from the commercial real estate and the personal property, are a great way to reduce the tax burden on our residents. And this has been talked about for some time, but really, how do we grow opportunities in our business district? Fill some of the vacancies. This is a big lever that we can pull. Secondly, are increasing those non-tax revenues, right? So the government funding revenues that we can generate from our services, such as the transfer station or recreation or library fees, those all comprise those non-tax revenues. What things can we do to drive those? We're going to talk a little less about non-tax revenues and then really getting into more on how do we control our operating expenses and our debt service, right? So what we just took a look at, the pie, right? How much do we spend on town services versus education? How much does we have to spend on servicing our debt every single year? So these are the three main levers. And, in the next couple of episodes, we're really going to focus in on number one, growing the commercial tax base, and number three, controlling expenses and debt service and the effect that those have on your taxes. All right, so I hope you all enjoyed this episode on the budget background and how your taxes are calculated. Part two will be about how did we get here. And as we mentioned, we're going to take a look at the last 10 years and how Woodbridge has approached taxes and how a lot of the choices that we've made, how they have shaped your tax bill today. So please do be sure to sign up for Common Ground emails. You can email us at ForWoodbridge@gmail.com. You can also scan the QR code and get added to our email list as well. And if you're interested in rolling up your sleeves, please reach out. If you have any questions, concerns, or ideas, you can email us. We'd love to hear from you, and hopefully you enjoyed today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next session. Thanks.